If the government does get its act in order on this, it really does provide Labor then with some difficulties, because I know that Tony Burke, Chris Bowen, Michelle Rowland, among others, said that they got it wrong when it comes to how they responded to people of faith at the last election. So you've got that on the one hand, and then on the other, you've got many in the party not willing to support a bill that they might believe could be discriminatory in another way.
I think it's a really difficult issue to try to solve in a legislative sense, that you have religious communities in a lot of Labor seats in southwestern Sydney, Western Sydney, where they will have a very different view to progressives in inner city seats who don't want to see discrimination on any basis, whether it be students, teachers, any other type of staff, whereas some of those religious communities might have a more, what you might call, traditional view of who should work within their schools and what students go to their schools. Very difficult to solve, and I think for both of the major parties, it's a very prickly issue.
Absolutely. Parnell, Palm McGuinness, the Coalition Party Room again meeting this afternoon. As I mentioned to Darren, not just difficulties for Labor, for the Liberal moderates, feeling very much under pressure, some of them in the face of the Teal independence. This is an issue I don't think they'll be comfortable with if they feel there's any discrimination against gay or trans students, for example, or teachers.
Absolutely, and there's already a lot of pushback in that sense. It's been a very poorly managed process, this bill, really, because of course there is a lot of nervousness around people being discriminated against in schools, and the idea of a child being discriminated against, in one of the most difficult times of its life, is of course devastating to most people. And at the same time, what you're doing is trying to balance the fact that it is important for religious organisations to be able to teach faith and what they believe is the sort of the family unit without crossing over into harming or discriminating against children. So this is the sort of discussion that really needed to be had in a low pressure environment, well out from an election, when you can negotiate with a freer hand and give things the time they need to find the best possible solution and the best compromise. And just in the last couple of weeks of Parliament, just before an election, is a terrible time for something like this to be the core issue.
Yep, indeed. But the Prime Minister adamant that he wants the legislation put to Parliament. He wants to say to people of faith in those religious communities, Parnell, that he's got their back, essentially. It's something I think, as I've mentioned to Darren before, a number of Labor MPs were well aware that they had missed that cohort and received some blowback because of it at the last election.
Right, of course, because people, especially in those electorates, which are often Labor electorates, want to feel that they are respected. And, the difference in the split in this is that the real discussion is about whether there should be a sort of faddishness allowed into school, which, in some areas, there are schools which reportedly have up to a quarter of students identifying as gender fluid, which is probably, more than the rate in the community that you would expect of children to sort of actually identify as trans or to be homosexual. And so I think that instead of this, I think that the discussion they should be having is about how do you teach a sort of traditional style of religion without travelling into this faddishness, but also without removing recognition that there are people who really experience, who really are same-sex attracted and who are really trans.
Yeah.
And so these schools are trying not to let this faddishness in. So I have a lot of sympathy for them and the MPs that represent them as well. They're trying to balance a really tricky thing while people are screaming on both sides.